I moved into this new apartment because of its strategic location, close to campus and the design studio where I intern. The building is old, yes, but the interior has been renovated in a modern, minimalist style that I really love. After months of noisy dormitory life, I craved peace and privacy. The first few weeks went smoothly. I was busy arranging my belongings, buying new furniture, and adjusting to a more regular sleep schedule. The apartment felt warm and cozy, though sometimes a sudden chill would creep into certain corners of the room, especially near my bedroom wall, which directly bordered the neighboring apartment, which, strangely, had always been vacant since I moved in. I assumed it was just due to poor insulation in an old building, or perhaps just my imagination after being accustomed to noise. However, that strange feeling gradually grew into something more tangible, not just an ordinary chill, but a sensation as if something was watching from behind the wall, an unseen presence yet felt very close, as if it had been there long before I occupied this space, patiently waiting to be noticed, a preliminary sign of the horror that would soon envelop every corner of my apartment, which once felt so safe and comfortable, now transforming into a stage for a terrifying drama, a play in which I myself was the main character, unknowingly stepping into a narrative far more sinister than I could have ever imagined, a narrative that subtly wove itself into the fabric of my daily life, beginning with the faint, inexplicable chills. That night, on my 25th birthday, I found a large box on my apartment doorstep. There was no sender, no card, just a faded red ribbon. Curious, I brought it inside. Within it lay an antique porcelain doll the size of a small child, dressed in a yellowed white wedding gown. Its face was beautiful, yet eerily vacant, with glass blue eyes that seemed to follow me. I felt a slight shiver, but was also fascinated by the uniqueness of this mysterious gift. I placed it on the bookshelf in the living room, naming her Bella. Every night before bed, I felt the doll's eyes watching me, and sometimes I swore I heard tiny footsteps from the living room after I turned off the lights. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to a writer's wild imagination or fatigue, but the chilling sensation that enveloped the room each time I heard the sound increasingly convinced me that something unusual was happening in my apartment, an uninvited presence yet growing ever more real, as if the doll was not merely an inanimate object, but a vessel harboring something else, something waiting for the opportune moment to reveal itself and disrupt the tranquility of my new life in this new place. A haunting realization that slowly began to overshadow my initial excitement, painting a picture of an unseen observer whose presence was growing stronger with each passing hour, leaving me with a profound sense of unease that lingered long after the lights were out. One night, I was awakened by a strange sound. Not footsteps, but a soft, rhythmic scraping sound, like wooden floors creaking from movement. I held my breath, trying to listen. The sound came from the living room. I slowly crept out of my bedroom. In the doorway of the living room, I saw her. Bella, the doll. She was no longer on the bookshelf. She wasn't in the middle of the room where I had seen her dance. The doll sat on the sofa, leaning against a pillow, her glass eyes staring straight towards my bedroom door. Her yellowed wedding gown looked slightly crumpled, and a strand of my long brown hair clip lay beside her. I remembered I had taken off my hair clip before going to sleep. A bad premonition began to grip me. This was no longer just a unique antique doll. Something was terribly wrong, something alive, or at least moving within that inanimate object. The fears spread quickly, turning curiosity into deep dread, as if the boundary between reality and fantasy had collapsed within my small apartment, and I was no longer sure what was real and what was merely a product of my frightened imagination. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat echoing the terrifying realization that Bella was not just observing me, but actively interacting with my personal space, an unsettling intrusion that stripped away any semblance of security I once felt, leaving me vulnerable to an entity whose intentions remained horrifyingly unclear, but whose presence was undeniable. I decided this doll had to leave my apartment. I couldn't sleep peacefully anymore with Bella nearby. I grabbed thick gloves from the kitchen, wrapped the doll in an old blanket, and tried to carry her out of the apartment. But when I tried to lift her, the doll felt heavy, much heavier than I thought. Every time I tried to hold her, it felt like there was a subtle resistance, as if she didn't want to leave. I finally managed to drag her out the door, leaving her right there in the hallway outside my apartment. I locked the door and tried to forget about it, convincing myself that I had banished the source of the horror from my life. However, when I returned home late that night, after finishing university and my internship, the first thing I saw when I opened my apartment door was Bella, the doll. She wasn't in the hallway. She was back, sitting nicely at the dining table, in my favorite chair, with an empty teacup in front of her. Around her neck hung a faded, worn piece of paper with antique handwriting. "You invited me in. You cannot cast me out." The fear transformed into overwhelming panic. Tears began to stream down my face, and I felt my breath catching in my throat. It was clear this doll was not merely an inanimate object, but a vessel, a portal for an entity with a purpose, and that purpose seemed to be me. I dared not to step out of my room, and the sight in the living room almost made me faint. My apartment was in complete disarray. Books were scattered on the floor, sofa cushions were torn, and a beautiful flower vase was now shattered into pieces. Amidst the chaos, Bella the doll sat in the middle of the living room, facing the main door, with her porcelain hands neatly folded in her lap. But this time, something was different. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, adorned her vacant porcelain face. And on the floor, in front of her, written in blood, from where I didn't know, was a message. "You are my bride. We will be together forever." The metallic smell of blood filled the room. The fear reached its peak, exceeding human tolerance. I screamed with all my might, but no one heard. My apartment had now become a lair for that entity, and I was its captive. I had no choice but to run as far as I could, without looking back, without thinking of anything else but escaping this indescribable terror, a terror that had claimed me as its own. And now I knew the hunt had begun, and I was its helpless prey. I didn't know if I would survive, but one thing was certain: I would never again open a mysterious box, and I would never again bring home a beautiful antique doll that harbored a rotten soul within. For this experience had changed my life forever, etching an eternal fear into my heart. I never returned to that apartment, not even to retrieve my belongings. Every night, I still hear that same high-pitched laughter, as if Bella is still dancing in the messy living room, waiting for me to return to her cold embrace. My job as an art gallery guard requires me to work alone at night, monitoring security cameras and occasionally patrolling every room. This gallery is a historic building with high ceilings, creaking wooden floors, and countless antique items hundreds of years old. Although sometimes eerie, I've grown accustomed to the quiet and silent atmosphere, sometimes interspersed with unexpected sounds, perhaps just air movement or the old building breathing. I always carry a flashlight, even though the main gallery lights remain dimly lit throughout the night. I know every painting, every sculpture, every artifact by heart. I know where the cameras are located, where the motion sensors are installed. It's a monotonous routine, but beneath it, there's always a sense of awe for the beauty of the artworks surrounding me. Although at the same time, I sometimes feel watched by thousands of eyes painted on canvases or carved into statues, as if they are silent witnesses to every event that takes place within this magnificent gallery, including my solitary presence in the middle of the dark night, a feeling that never truly leaves my mind, making me question if I am truly alone or if these silent observers hold a deeper, more profound awareness of their surroundings than I could ever comprehend. A chilling thought that often crosses my mind in the dead of night, suggesting that I might be merely a temporary guest in a space that has borne witness to countless human stories, each leaving an invisible imprint. One night, around 3 a.m., as I was turning the key to lock one of the temporary exhibition rooms, a room housing an ancient jewelry collection from the 18th century, I felt something strange. My key, which I always kept on a special keychain with other keys, felt lighter. I reached for the keychain, and my key for the jewelry room was gone. My heart pounded. I was absolutely certain I had used it just minutes before when I opened the room for my final patrol. I rummaged through my pants pockets, my jacket pockets, my fanny pack, but the key was nowhere to be found. I tried to think rationally. Perhaps it had fallen somewhere as I walked. I took out my flashlight and began retracing the path I had just taken from the control room to the jewelry room, meticulously checking every inch of the polished wooden floor, hoping to find the small key that might have slipped into a crack. But each step of my search only intensified my fear that the key was truly lost and not just fallen. A chill began to spread up my spine, not from the already cool room temperature, but from a deepening premonition which signaled that something was wrong, something that couldn't be explained by logic alone, a sign that this gallery held secrets far deeper than I had ever imagined, and I was now caught in the middle of it, a pawn in a game I didn't understand, the stakes of which were rapidly escalating beyond mere professional responsibility. I returned to the jewelry room, turned on all the lights, and meticulously examined every corner of the room. Here were glass display cases containing antique diamond necklaces and earrings. There was a small stage where a royal crown was displayed. Everything looked secure. No signs of forced entry, no scratches on the glass. But my key was gone. I started to panic. This key was the master key for the most valuable collection in the gallery. Losing it could mean dismissal, or worse, I could be accused of involvement if something happened. I circled the room repeatedly, checking under display tables, among the upholstery, even in the small crevices of the worn floor. It felt as if an invisible hand had taken it, not simply dropped it. I couldn't remember ever putting it anywhere but on my keychain, which I always kept safely in my pocket. And this made me even more confused and terrified, because the disappearance of this key felt like a message, a bad omen deliberately left for me, and I knew this was not just carelessness. I returned to the control room, replaying the CCTV footage from the last few hours, focusing on myself. I saw myself opening the jewelry room door, entering, then exiting and locking the door. But as I slowed down the footage of myself locking the door, I saw it. My hand was indeed holding the key and turning it, but in the recording, after I finished locking, the key did not return to my keychain. It seemed to float out of my grasp, darting behind me and disappearing into the darkness of the corridor, beyond the camera's reach. I replayed that section repeatedly, unable to believe what I was seeing. It happened too fast, like an optical illusion or a glitch in the camera, but I knew it wasn't. It was the key being taken by something invisible to the naked eye, an entity that might have been lurking in the quiet corners of the gallery all this time, observing and waiting for the right moment to show its power, and now it had taken something very important from me, as if to play a game or warn me that I was not alone here, instilling a profound sense of helplessness and an icy realization that the gallery held secrets far older and more formidable than its precious artifacts. Secrets now actively engaging with my presence, turning my routine shift into a terrifying encounter with the unknown. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the footage in my mind, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was none. The key was truly gone, and I saw it disappear not by falling, but by being taken. I spent the rest of the night patrolling the gallery every half hour, checking all doors and windows, ensuring no one entered or exited. Every shadow felt like a figure. Every whisper of the wind felt like footsteps. I felt watched, as if unseen eyes were following me from behind every statue, every painting. I knew that losing this key wasn't just about job responsibility. It was about another presence that had revealed itself, a presence claiming this gallery as its territory, and my key was just part of its new game. I could no longer see this gallery as a normal workplace. Now it was home to dark secrets, a place where the boundary between the real world and the unknown had blurred, and I was trapped within it. Since that night, every time I patrolled, I always felt another set of footsteps behind me, a cold breath on my neck, and occasionally the faint jingle of keys, as if the entity was still playing with my key, taunting me from the darkness and making sure I would never forget who truly controlled the gallery, transforming every night into a labyrinth of endless fear. I finally decided to resign, unable to bear the unseen psychological pressure any longer. However, even after leaving, sometimes I still hear the jingle of keys in the middle of the night, as if the entity was following me, ensuring that I would never truly be free from its memory. A chilling reminder that some things, once encountered, leave an indelible mark on one's soul, permanently altering the perception of reality and safety.
I decided to rent a secluded cabin in the woods for a whole month. My idea was to find inspiration for my new horror novel. Far from the hustle and bustle of the city, with weak phone signals providing minimal distraction, I hoped to focus and experience an atmosphere conducive to my writing. The cabin was small, made of wood, with large windows overlooking dense pine trees. The first night felt magical, with the sound of crickets and rustling leaves as a lullaby. I brought plenty of books, my laptop, and enough food supplies. Electricity came from a small generator behind the cabin, and water from a well. A simple life, yet full of promise for peace and productivity. I felt like I had gained freedom from all the pressures of city life. However, this freedom came with an unexpected price, a silence too deep, a darkness too profound, which slowly began to reveal another side of the inspiration I sought. Not just imaginative ideas, but a more tangible and disturbing experience, as if this cabin held secrets it didn't want outsiders to know. A story that could only be heard by those brave enough to be alone in the silent, endless wilderness. And I, quite naively, had stepped right into the heart of that horror, becoming an unwilling participant in a narrative woven from shadows and unexplainable occurrences that now defined my solitary existence in this remote, seemingly idyllic, yet increasingly menacing haven. On the second night, as I was engrossed in writing, the lamp above my desk began to flicker. At first I didn't pay much attention to it. Perhaps the generator was running low on fuel, or there was a problem with the wiring. I tried to tighten the bulb, but there was no change. The flickering continued, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, like an irregular Morse code. I sighed, deciding to ignore it and continue writing. But the flickering became increasingly disturbing, as if someone was deliberately turning the switch on and off near me. I tried to concentrate on my story's plot, about a character trapped in an old house, but every time the light flickered, my imagination was instead thrown into the darkness outside the window, imagining what might be peering from behind the dense trees, a shadow I couldn't catch with my naked eye, yet its presence felt very real and menacing, as if something was trying to grab my attention from the world I was building on paper. An entity that wanted me to be part of its own story, and I began to feel deeply uneasy. I decided to check the generator. I grabbed my flashlight, put on a thick jacket, and went out behind the cabin. The forest at night was much denser and more frightening than I had imagined from inside. Trees loomed tall, their shadows dancing under my flashlight beam, and the sounds of the night, the rustling wind, small animal noises, seemed much louder. The generator was working normally. Its fuel tank was full, and there were no loose wires. I returned to the cabin feeling confused and a little anxious. If it wasn't the generator, then what was causing the light to flicker? I sat back at my desk, staring at the still flickering lamp. I tried turning it off and on again from the wall switch, but there was no change. It felt as if something was controlling the flow of electricity, an unseen force deliberately playing its game with me, trying to test the limits of my patience and sanity in the midst of a chilling solitude. A sinister puppeteer manipulating the very fabric of my temporary home, making the once welcoming light a source of growing dread, confirming that my solitude was an illusion and that an unseen presence was keenly aware of every move, playing a psychological game that chipped away at my sense of security, transforming my creative sanctuary into a prison of dread. I began to feel that the flickering light was not just a technical malfunction, but a message, a communication from something I couldn't see. Each flicker felt deliberate, as if an eye was watching me from the darkness and communicating with me through that erratic light. I tried to sit still, observing its flickering patterns. Sometimes it flickered rapidly, as if in a panic, sometimes slowly, as if observing. There were moments when it flickered 3 times, paused briefly, then flickered again. I tried to note down these patterns, hoping to decipher their meaning. The cabin, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now began to feel like a trap, a place where I was the sole object of attention for an unseen yet incredibly powerful presence. I began to feel deeply isolated, not just from the outside world, but also from myself, as irrational thoughts began to creep into my mind, questioning everything I believed about logic and reality. Every time the light flickered in an unusual pattern, I felt a piercing cold, as if the unseen presence was passing through me, trying to enter my mind and read every word I wrote, or even steer my story in a direction I never intended, confirming that my creative process was no longer solely my own, but influenced by an entity whose true nature remained shrouded in the unsettling dance of light and shadow. An entity that seemed to derive pleasure from manipulating my perceptions and subtly asserting its control over my very thoughts and actions. The tension inside the cabin intensified. I couldn't write. Every sentence I wrote felt hollow. Every idea felt trivial compared to the mystery I was experiencing. I began to feel extremely restless, constantly looking at the flickering lamp, waiting for the next pattern, trying to translate the whispers of that light. I even tried talking, asking the something what it wanted, but all I got were the continuous flickers of the lamp. I felt like I was trapped in a puzzle I couldn't solve, a game whose rules I didn't know, and my opponent was an invisible entity whose presence was incredibly strong in every corner of this cabin. Fear began to grip me, not fear of ghosts or monsters, but fear of uncertainty, fear of the madness that might slowly consume me in this chilling silence. And I knew I had to find an answer to the mystery of this flickering light before I completely lost my mind in the secluded cabin that I once thought was the perfect refuge for inspiration, now transformed into a crucible for my unraveling sanity, a place where the line between reality and hallucination grew thinner with each flicker, leaving me utterly vulnerable to whatever malevolent force had chosen me as its next plaything, a pawn in a terrifying game where my sanity was the ultimate prize. The climax of the horror occurred on my last night in the cabin. The lamp began to flicker incredibly fast and erratically, making the whole room feel like it was being struck by lightning. Then, suddenly, all the lights went out, pitch black. From outside, beyond the window, I saw a flash of light. Not a lightning flash, but a flashlight beam, flickering, moving from one window to another, as if someone was circling the cabin, peering inside. My heart pounded erratically. I crawled under the table, trying to hide myself.
Then the flashlight beam stopped at the main window, and I saw it, a dark silhouette, standing there, holding the flashlight tightly, its light flickering in the exact same pattern as the lamp inside the cabin earlier. However, it wasn't human. Its form was too tall, too thin, and its head was tilted to one side in an unnatural way. Then a sound, a soft, hissing sound floated in the air, followed by whispers coming from all directions, saying, "We're waiting for you. Your story isn't over." I screamed with all my might, grabbed my bag, and ran out of the cabin without looking back, running through the dark forest until I reached the main road. I never returned to that cabin. My horror novel was never finished, because I myself had become part of a much more terrifying horror story. A story where I no longer wrote, but merely ran, forever chased by whispers from the darkness and the never-ending flickering light in the corner of my eye. The forest, once a source of inspiration, became a symbol of endless dread, a vast, living entity that had claimed me, not as a writer, but as a perpetual character in its own dark tale, ensuring that the flickering light would forever be etched into my memory. A constant, chilling reminder of the night I truly became, part of the stories I once only imagined.